Without his presence, everything else is just noise. So what happens when you've got all of the right rituals, but none of the presence of God? Let's go back to the first temple to find out. In the Holy of Holies sat the Ark of the Covenant, where God's presence rested with the Israelites for almost 500 years. It was a tangible reminder that God was with his people. But by the time we reach the days of Jesus, something's different. There's still a temple, still a Holy of Holies, but no Ark. The priests and religious leaders are still following every detail of the law, but the presence of God, it's not there. They knew the rules inside and out, but here's the thing. Without God's presence, all the rituals and traditions in the world don't matter. Jesus points out in John 8:19 when he says, "You know neither me nor my Father. If you knew me, you would know my Father also." The religious leaders were experts in the law, but they completely missed the relationship with God. In Matthew 15 verses 7 and 9, Jesus quotes Isaiah saying, "This people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. But in vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrines the precepts of men." They were doing everything right on the surface, but their hearts weren't in it. They were missing the most important thing, the presence of God. It's easy to think that if everyone just followed all of Jesus' teachings, we'd have a perfect world. But here's the truth. Even if we followed every rule, without God's presence, it would still be empty. The law wasn't enough to restore our relationship with God. Only Jesus could do that. So how did the Israelites go from having the Ark of the Covenant to having an empty temple by the time Jesus arrived? In Jeremiah 3, verses 6 through 7, God says, "Have you seen what faithless Israel did? She went up on every high hill and under every green tree, and she was a harlot there. And I thought, after she's done all these things, she will return to me. But she did not return." See, even though the Israelites had God's presence from the time they left Egypt, they constantly wavered between following him and turning away. And if we're being honest, we do the same thing today. We start out feeling close to God, but as life goes on, we sometimes drift. And the key thing is, it's always a choice. God doesn't force us away. We make the decision to walk out. It's like walking out of a room with the light still on. The light hasn't changed, but we've left it behind. And here's the good news. God never just leaves us there. Even when we mess up, he offers a way back. So how did the Israelites end up without the Ark? Disconnected from God's presence? It came down to consequences. After years of back and forth with God, they ended up in the Babylonian captivity, just like the prophets had warned them. Even in captivity, though, God didn't abandon them. He promised they'd return, and they did. But when they came back to rebuild the temple, the Ark was gone. Jewish tradition says that either Jeremiah hid the Ark before the Babylonians took over Jerusalem, or someone stole it. Either way, it's never been found. So they rebuilt the temple, but the Holy of Holies was empty. No Ark, no physical presence of God, just a space where the Ark used to be. And this is where it hits home for us. We can rebuild what looks like the life we used to have with God, but if his presence isn't there, it's just an empty shell. Then came what's known as the silent years. The time between the Old Testament and the New Testaments, when there were no prophets and no new scriptures. By the time Jesus came, the religious leaders had the temple, the law, and the rituals, but no relationship with God. And because they didn't have that relationship, they couldn't recognize God even when he was right in front of them. The takeaway? It's not about going through the motions. Our lives need to be built on the presence of God, not just on keeping up appearances. Without his presence, everything else is just noise.